ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We know that there are others that will be joining us as we move along, because we had quite a few people signed up. My name is Fanny Glover. I will be, what is the word I'm looking for? I will be facilitating this session today. And we are so honored to have a special guest speaker today. But before I introduce the two wonderful people to my right, I would like to first remind those who've been on before, new people who've not, what this platform is all about. It was created about 2 years ago for the sole purpose of providing an opportunity for everyone to feel comfortable in not only learning, but asking questions. So as we go throughout today, or this hour, we are hoping you will feel comfortable enough to either unmute yourself, ask a question, or type in your chat box if you're on Zoom. We will hold your question until the speaker is at a place where he can pause, and then we will read the question. Do not feel that we will read your name, because we won't. We'll just read the question and not your name, and just in case you want to feel that you want to remain anonymous, and that's totally okay. Again, this is a safe zone, and we wanted to keep it that way, as well as a respectful zone. And we want you to feel comfortable. It's a learning opportunity for all of us. But before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to introduce the two people to my immediate right, starting with.
Hi, I'm Aksha Qasim. I'm the Community Education Coordinator at ECLC.
Hi, I'm Mariah Heber, and I'm the CCR&R Program Assistant here at ECLC.
And they are the experts on technology. I know. So let's talk a little bit about Stan. Our learning cafe today is my journey in 8 life lessons as an out gay man that can apply to everyone. Stan, who I met at a national conference many years ago, it was, and I don't remember exactly where, but I thought he was just so profound, and I walked away with so much information, and he did it with such flair. I love the way he presented this information. So a little bit about Stan. He's a nationally known LGBT speaker and trainer. Stan Kimmer will share his journey of coming out as a gay man in his mid-30s. Stan is, as I said, he's a nationally recognized consultant and speaker on all areas of workplace diversity with a deep expertise in LGBT diversity. For 4 years, Stan served as IBM's corporate global LGBT diversity manager, including establishing IBM's procedures for supporting transgender employees and assisting with case management of employees undergoing gender transition while in the workplace. Since retiring from IBM, Stan has trained or spoken in over 50 venues, reaching over 3,000 professionals. He is a certified out and equal workplace advocate, building bridges trainer, and a certified training management course practitioner. Within the transgender arena, Stan has provided training to client, employee, and HR teams, and has assisted with case management of several gender transitions in the workplace. Stan holds a bachelor's degree from Georgia Tech and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and in his spare time, trains as a competitive adult figure skater. So, without further ado, let's welcome Stan. Stan, take it away.
Thank you so much, and I'm very glad to be on the line. I'm going to hopefully go through this, I'm going to try to go as fast as I can because I have so much information. And Fanny, I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago at the New York State SHRM conference in Buffalo, New York, is where we met. This is kind of a unique presentation because I'm going to spend a time sharing my personal story, but then I'm going to intersperse within this story different important information about supporting the LGBT community. So a little about me. I did start my new passion of becoming a competitive figure skater at 59 years old with no prior experience. My partner Rich and I have been together for 27 years. And until recently, we were childless until we got our new baby, who just came. Okay, so included in this story of my life journey and 8 life lessons that can apply to everyone as an out gay man, I'm going to be interspersing different pieces of information, the basic, correct current terminology and definitions around the LGBT community, the business rationale for any organization to fully support LGBT people, an introduction to transgender people and gender fluidity, including the proper use of pronouns, and how to interact respectfully with LGBT people, and how to be an effective ally. And at the very end of the presentation, I'll close with a slide that has my email address. So anybody that reaches out and emails me and asks for this PowerPoint file, I will be glad to send it to you. So, the journey begins. Basically, my family moved to Raleigh, North Carolina in 1970 when I was 15. I actually went through the born-again Christian experience during the Jesus Revolution of the early 1970s, went off to college, started working at IBM, got involved in my church, eventually got married, and after 18 months, I realized this is not me. Something is not right. And I started the new adventure of realizing that I was gay and coming out to myself. So basically, after coming out, I very soon thereafter met my life partner, Rich. We've been together for 27 years. Here we are at Halloween. Oh yeah, Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Rich hates it when I show this photo. But at this point, I got thrown out of my Baptist church for gross immorality when I refused to repent because I knew the right thing was being true to myself and being who I am. So lesson 1 is it's great to be true to yourself or myself, and others are going to respect that. Now, what happened when I came out to my parents, my father was not very happy about this situation. He basically said, you're my son and I love you, but your mother and I will never visit you, and Rich is in the house, and Rich is never welcome here. And, I shared this with Rich, and instead of being all mad about it, he figured out that the best way to win my father over was to be really nice. So when my father fell off a roof cleaning gutters, and he couldn't do any yard work, Rich went over every week and mowed my parents' yard. And that won my father over. So lesson 2 is being super nice may work better than being nasty. Rich really, took the higher ground and didn't, say, well, if your parents want nothing to do with me, I want nothing to do with them. But he was really nice and won them over. Anyway, during this time, I was not too publicly out. I didn't share with my coworkers at IBM, but in October of 1996, IBM announced domestic partner benefits. And I was a member of a business group in Raleigh, a gay business group, and a press reporter got my name and called me up and asked if I could get someone at IBM to participate in an interview about IBM granting domestic partner benefits. And because it was late Friday afternoon, I knew no one else was around. Since I was press trained by IBM, I decided to do the interview myself. And the next day, there was my picture and my quote on the front page of the business section of the Raleigh News and Observer. Now, this is another article that happened about 10 years later. I can't find the old original article, but I came out in a very public way. So lesson number 3 is sometimes the optimal time to come out simply appears. Grab it and run. And most of the feedback was very positive. And I became vice president and then acting president of our employee resource group. And as the highest ranking out gay employee at IBM at my location, I was always used on executive panels. They have the woman VP, the Hispanic VP, the black VP, on these diversity panels. And even though I was only a senior professional and not an executive, I was actually placed on these panels. And there was a person who had the job as IBM's LGBT diversity manager. His name was Rick Partridge, and I had him on a pedestal, like the professional lead gay guy at IBM, and I always looked up to him. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, the VP of diversity calls me up and says, I've been watching you, and I want to offer you Rick's job, since he's leaving it, as IBM's LGBT diversity manager. So lesson 4 is you never know who is watching and what good may come of it. So I started my professional journey as IBM's Gay and Lesbian Program Manager in 1999, and at that time it was called Gay and Lesbian. And before the 3 years were up, we added bisexual and transgender. So, you know, this is where I started learning about the business aspects of supporting LGBT diversity. So I'll now go into some of the content and divert from my story a little bit. But, you know, why is diversity and inclusion important for any organization? First of all, you want to recruit the very best employees, and you want to have the widest possible net, and that includes LGBT people. And secondly, when you get those diverse and great people on your team, you're going to want them to feel welcomed, and they're going to want to stay and perform their very best. Then you have diversity of ideas and talent. You know, different diversity constituencies have various ways of looking at issues and solving them. So for example, if you had some LGBT people, you know, on staff in the early childhood development space, they could maybe offer ideas of how to work with LGBT children. And then social responsibility, that any group would want the whole community to think well of their organization and say that organization supports diversity. And finally, you want to be able to provide the best customer service to everyone you serve. And that might include LGBT parents that have children, with parents that might have children coming out as LGBT. And I'll share a little bit about the phenomena of transgender children now coming out very, very young later in this presentation. And IBM's diversity theme was that IBM is the bridge between the workplace and the marketplace. So some very important definitions. And most people are pretty aware of this, especially if they worked in the diversity field, but sexual orientation and gender identity are two very different things. Sexual orientation is referring to the gender a person is sexually attracted to, who they want to spend their life with. So if you're attracted to people of the opposite gender, you're straight or heterosexual. If you're attracted to people of the same gender, you're gay, lesbian, homosexual. And if you're attracted to anyone of any gender, you're bisexual. Gender identity is how a person feels internally about who they truly are. So it could be a little girl who's growing up at 3 years old, and 99% of transgender people realize they're different at the age of 3 or 4. And it could be a little girl, her parents are dressing her up in dresses and having her play with dolls, and she's thinking deep in her heart, you know, I feel like a little boy inside. Why are my parents treating me like a little girl? Or it could be a little boy growing up, and his parents are roughhousing with him and giving him footballs and having him play in the sandbox. And he's thinking, you know, I feel like I'm a girl inside. How come my parents are treating me like a boy? So gender identity is how a person feels about who they are deep inside. Some people naively think that all gay men are feminine and wish they were women, and that all lesbians are very masculine and wish they were men. But that's the furthest thing from the truth. You know, most lesbians and gay men are very satisfied, you know, being men or being women. So gender expression is how a person communicates his or her gender identity by their clothing, hairstyle, etc. Transgender is the umbrella term for people whose gender identity or expression is different than that assigned at birth. And then LGBT is the common abbreviation for the community. People used to use GLBT and LGBT interchangeably, but it looks like the community has now stabilized on LGBT. And some younger communities are now re-embracing the word queer and identifying as queer. That word still rankles some of the older generation, but the younger generation are perfectly fine with it. And I'm not going to go over everything on every slide because I want to make sure that I have plenty of time for Q's and A's at the end. So this is a great pictorial way of showing these dynamics of these different dimensions. Gender identity is who you feel you are deep inside your core, that you feel like you're a man, you're a woman, or you could feel like you're gender ambiguous or gender fluid. Gender expression is how you show your gender in what you wear and your mannerisms. Biological sex are the body parts that you're born with, and sexual orientation is who you fall in love with. And one very important aspect of this slide is that every one of these dimensions is not either totally to the left or totally to the right. Yes, many people are totally to the right or left on several of these, but there are people who are in the middle and not totally one way or the other. For example, you know, a bisexual person who could be attracted to both men and women is not totally to the left or totally to the right, but can fall somewhere in the middle of that sexual orientation. Biological sex, there are people who are born with both female and male organs who are intersex. I'm not going to go through every definition here, but I'll go through the third and fourth and last one. Male to female are those people who start their life as a boy or a male and later transition to female. The most famous MTF is probably Caitlyn Jenner, who used to be Bruce Jenner. And female to male is going from a girl or a woman to a man. And probably the most famous person there is Chaz Bono, who used to be Chastity Bono, the offspring of pop singers Sonny and Cher. And he actually appeared on Dancing with the Stars. And cisgender is the opposite of transgender. Cisgender refers to those of us who have been perfectly satisfied with our gender all of our lives and have no desire to change our gender. So what makes transgender real? Transgender people are preoccupied with their gender almost every day. I have a woman who works with me who's transgender, and she often says, how many of you think about your gender when you wake up in the morning? You just know who you are. But transgender people have to remind themselves, oh, yeah, I'm a guy. I'm going to have to put on my guy clothes and be a guy at work, even though they feel like they're a woman. And transgender people also most often dream in the gender they feel they are. Transgender people feel different from an early age. WPATH is the World Physicians Academy of Transgender Health. It's a set of doctors who are deep experts in transgender care, and they have declared that people do not choose to be transgender. It is something that's diagnosed and a part of their internal wiring, and it's something that never goes away. So really the only choice a transgender person has is what they do about it. If they hide this secret all their lives, if they live their professional life in one gender and their social life in another, or if they go through the whole process of changing their gender. There's very there's important policy issues. I'm just going to hit on a few of these for lack of time, but I'll talk a little bit about suicide, that the suicide rate among transgender people attempt is about 9 times that of non-transgender people because of the stigma, the struggle, not acceptance of their family, etc. And also they have a very high unemployment rate. Oftentimes, they live in poverty, and homeless shelters do not know what to do with transgender people. The murder rate of transgender people is 9 times that of the murder rate of non-transgender people. And there's often issues around identification. Like there's a lot of states that will not let you change your driver's license without changing your birth certificate. And so, every time you get stopped by the police or checking at a hotel, people look at your license and the gender on the license doesn't match what you look like. The transition process is a very complex, rigorous process. Not every single person goes through every single step, but it involves a year or longer of psychological counseling. People then have to live a trial period presenting in the new gender, often nights and weekends. Then usually the first thing that starts physically is hormone treatment. And if you're transitioning to a male, you start taking testosterone. And if you're transitioning to a female, you take estrogen. And people see a little subtle changes starting to happen. Loss of facial hair, growing of a little bit of facial hair, softening or roughening of the skin, a little bit of weight distribution. Oftentimes transgender people need to get coaching. What's the appropriate dress in the workplace if I'm going to be coming as a man or a woman? Voice coaching to raise or lower how they speak. And then various surgical procedures that you have the top surgery, either removing of the breasts or breast augmentation, removing of the bottom parts and creation of some new bottom parts. And very importantly, not all transgender people go through every single step. Sometimes for financial reasons or health reasons, people cannot do some of the major surgeries. But when a person is far enough along this journey, the doctor will issue a certificate basically saying, I now declare that you are in this new gender, and you can start going through legal name changes, changing your gender marker with the Social Security Commission, etc. So gender is a legal designation. It is not simply determined by what body parts you do or do not have. Another very interesting aspect of the transgender community is that people are now coming out at much earlier ages and older ages. Because more people now understand what transgender is, parents who have children who identify as transgender are now letting their children, live in the new gender. And if you see there on the left, Briella, who started life as a little boy, is now going to school as a girl and goes by the name Briella, and started doing this when she was 5 years old with supportive parents. So, these are situations in early childhood development that you might see more and more of, especially if, children who are 3 or 4 years old, start expressing that they don't feel they're in the right body. There's a really cool children's book called Phoenix Goes to School. And it's about a transgender girl, a little boy who feels he's a girl, and he goes to first grade dressed in little girl clothes, and how accepting her classmates are. And so that's a really good book to look into if you want to do like a little, children's book to explain to kids, what transgender is. And then on the right, a lot more people now are transitioning at older ages once their children are grown up and it has no impact on their family, or if they're worried about their career, they start transitioning after retirement. This is some information from GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, a survey done thousands of students around the country. And as you can see, there's some disturbing data that there's still a lot of work to do in our schools, that, over 50% of children who are LGBT feel unsafe, either because of their sexual orientation or gender expression. And that down at the bottom, that over 70% have avoided school functions because of being LGBT or extracurricular activities. So a lot of work is also needed, in our school systems. I want to go through the impact of language, because language really impacts how people feel about themselves and you talk about or to people, and also language continues to evolve and change. So this is like a little table that shows the group, the proper term, an outdated term that maybe people used 20 years ago, but you really shouldn't use anymore, and then offensive terms. So you have the proper term for the LGBT community. Now you can refer to a person's spouse as their partner, husband, wife. Transgender person, it's transgender or trans person. Trans woman, trans man. Transvestite or transsexual are outdated terms, and not using a person's chosen name is very offensive, or referring to someone as a tranny or a she-male. Intersexed people born with both sets of organs are referred to as intersexed. Hermaphrodite is an older, out-of-date term. And then there's gender ambiguous people. And this is becoming a lot more accepted, especially in the younger generations, where a person doesn't feel totally male or female, and they consider themselves gender fluid, and sometimes may want to appear more masculine, and sometimes might want to appear more feminine. And we see a lot of gender fluid kids also in school. And things are continuing to emerge with language. One way of really breaking the ice, especially like in a conference session, is having name tags where people put their preferred pronouns, whether it be him, he, him, his, she, her, hers, they, them, theirs. A lot of times now, like in small group meetings, people are asked to introduce themselves and give their preferred pronouns. So, my turn, I say I'm Stan Kimmer. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. And it kind of breaks the ice. Oftentimes, people who are gender fluid or gender ambiguous will like you to use they, them, and theirs, and not be referred to as he or she. Language continues to emerge. There's some new things going on, and we don't know how well these things are going to be accepted yet because they're in the very early stages. But Z and Zer are kind of gender neutral pronouns to take the place of he and him or she and her. And also some people are using MX period as a gender neutral honorific title instead of Mr., Mrs., Ms., or Miss, which are all gender specific. So we'll have to see how these things take off in the future. So let me go back to my story now, and then we'll go back to some more content. But we did the first 4 lessons. So actually, I started getting involved in Metropolitan Community Church soon after coming out, because I really felt that, God didn't hate me for who I was. Metropolitan Community Churches have congregations all over the world, a few hundred here in the US. And I did get involved, and actually Metropolitan Community Churches is a member of the North Carolina Community Churches. I got involved with some racial diversity issues in our congregation. I attended a workshop and learned a lot about racism, white privilege, and how to better engage with people different than myself. And then I started facilitating workshops around racism and race relations in my denomination in the Southeast. And I saw the North Carolina Council of Churches had a racial justice committee that I got involved in. And after serving on this committee, they actually asked me to be on the board of the North Carolina Council of Churches. So I did learn a whole lot. I learned that I needed to build alliances and share and show that I care just the same or more about other issues and not just my issues as a gay man. And I even did a workshop called My Issues Are Your Issues, and the importance of engaging allies. I also realized that as an out gay man, I was going to be under a microscope at the North Carolina Council of Churches and had to be very faithful with my attendance, participation, and giving. And I needed to show that I was a good listener. And so actually, I was elected as president of the North Carolina Council of Churches as an out gay man. So lesson number 5, is the importance of building alliances and not having a single issue focus. And there's the workshop, My Issues Are Your Issues. And at this point, I'm going to go and talk a little bit about allies, because that is such an important part of reaching and communicating with the LGBT community. And I know that many of you, probably a majority on this call, are not LGBT or T, but you're interested in being allies. An ally does not have all the answers, but they truly believe that anybody, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, should be treated with equal respect and dignity, and that they always maintain a commitment to learning and educating themselves. Leaders set an example. And, as leaders need to actually, step out. If you hear, like a parent or someone, tell a joke about LGBTQ people that's unfriendly at their expense, you probably need to think about stepping in and intervening and saying that's not cool. And of course, having zero tolerance for any kind of harassment, discrimination, or any other anti-LGBTQ behavior. And of course, it could be a naive offender, someone who doesn't mean harm, and you can, correct them gently and use it as a learning experience. So I'm very grateful for the allies that are with me. And this is my cousin Brandon, who is a straight guy, and he hangs out with at Gay Pride with me and out Raleigh, and has been an excellent ally, to the LGBT community. Another view of allyship is kind of the 4 steps. First of all, you're aware. LGBT people exist out there. The next step is becoming a friend, that you have friends, people you interact with occasionally who are LGBTQ+. Or the third one is a peer. You really interact with LGBT people on a daily basis. And then finally, the deepest level of allyship is being a true advocate, where you're doing things, taking steps in the spheres where you are to make life better for LGBT people. So, be visible, educate yourself, share resources, use inclusive language, attend events. Also, in terms of being allies to transgender people, some inappropriate things are asking about their past as male or female. You shouldn't be asking things like, hey, can you show me a picture of what you used to look like? They're trying to move and live in their new gender. You should never ask about what medical procedures they have or have not had, questions of a sexual nature. You can ask me those questions on a forum like this, but you shouldn't be asking a trans person, hey, are you attracted to men or women or what? Anything that starts with, I know this is a bad question, but, then you should stop. And please don't call transgender people trannies. So lesson number 6 I talked about is, as a visible gay man in a leadership role, I did have the added responsibility of being a good representative of the LGBT community. And so I was elected president of the North Carolina Council of Churches. Here I am presenting the Distinguished Service Award to Father Joe Vetter, a Catholic priest who is the head of the Catholic Center at Duke University, who is a great ally to the LGBT community. Here I am making a presentation around diversity to the Leaders of Tomorrow, which is a group sponsored by the Raleigh Black MBA Association to help encourage and mentor Black kids to go to college and take on leadership roles. I think when I was presenting this, I was the only white person in the room. Then we get to lessons 7 and 8. That, that there's going to be hate, and take the hate with a grain of salt and chuckle at the absurdness of it all. What's very interesting is that when I was elected president of the North Carolina Council of Churches, about 98% of the feedback and press coverage was very positive. But then, some right-wing groups, wrote some very interesting columns like, Apostasy and collusion with apostates continue to dismantle the already morally bankrupt American church system. The North Carolina Council of Churches, an aggregation of various denominations which advocate mostly liberal social causes, has elected a homosexual as the leader of the organization. Really, the language there is just filled with prejudice and hate. And there was one article that actually said that my hidden agenda was to go to junior high Sunday school classes across the state so I could seduce boys. I mean, just totally absurd. I can't let that get to me. I just have to take the hate with a grain of salt and chuckle at how absurd it all is. Then in 2010, I had enough of full-time work and I retired from IBM and started my own consulting practice and focused on the two things I enjoyed the most during my 31 career at IBM, which was working around career development and working around diversity. And so the final lesson, lesson 8, is at my age, now 64, it is time to enjoy my remaining years and not do anything that makes me miserable. Like, I've been elected to a few boards and they're so dysfunctional. It's like, I don't need this. So I depart. And of course, 5 years ago, I said, this is my life dream to become a competitive adult figure skater. And I train almost every day. I compete nationally. In my skill level, I recently finished the season at 3rd place on the East Coast. And I am just having the time of my life doing that and just being fully out and enjoying who I am. So before we get to Q's and A's, and it looks like we're going to have a good 20 minutes, my life lessons are: 1, it's great to be true to oneself. 2, being super nice works out better than being super nasty. 3, sometimes the optimal time to come out simply appears. Grab it and run. 4, you never know who is watching and what good may come from it. 5, it's important to build alliances and not be a single issue person. 6, in a leadership role, I needed to realize I might be representing the LGBT community and I need to be extra diligent. 7, take the hate with a grain of salt and chuckle with it. And finally, I'm not getting any younger. It's time to enjoy my remaining years. So as we go into Q's, this is my unique way of telling my story. So you can think of ways that you can tell your story. Last week, I spent my birthday teaching the Diversity First training in Chicago and attending my 40th year MBA class reunion. So I'm going to leave this slide up here while we do the Q's and A's, so you can write down my email address and phone number, stan@totalengagementconsulting.com. I hope that, if you want a copy of these slides, just simply email me and ask me to send you the slides. And hopefully if you email me, I can also add you to my monthly newsletter. So you can keep up with my speaking schedule, my skating schedule, and all the other exciting things that I'm doing and new resources around career development and diversity. So, Fanny, I'll turn it over to you to moderate Q's and A's.
Yes. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask? I was just talking to Aksha and Mariah that we could probably send out your contact information when we yeah.
Do that.
So yes, definitely. So here's while people are thinking of a question, and you can unmute yourself, or you could just write in the chat box. But here's a question that I have, and that is, and I get this about African American and Blacks and that sort of thing as well. How do you stay abreast of all the terminology? I mean, where's the go-to to make sure that you're staying abreast of correct terminology?
Actually, depending upon, the field you're in. If you're like in the education field, the Gay Lesbian Straight Education Network, glsen.org, always has great resources on students and the latest things happening around terminology and students. Out and Equal Workplace Advocates, outandequal.org, deals with workplace terminology and what's going on in the workplace. And then the leading national organization, HRC, Human Rights Campaign, hrc.org, always has lots of information about the latest things happening in the community. And then for allies and parents, a great resource, especially if you have kids coming out, is PFLAG. That's Paul, F as in Frank, LAG.org. It stands for Parents, Family, and Friends of LGBT. And they have support groups all around the country. If people are dealing with relatives or children or siblings who are coming out as LGBT, and they have a lot of useful resources.
Oh, wow. Your wealth of information. So until we see, remember everyone, usually people wait until the very end and they start sending their questions through fast and furiously, and we're unable to answer all the questions. If you're unmuting, just remember we are recording, so you can certainly do that, but you can also use the chat box. And you can just send it directly to us, like change from everyone to private, and no one else will see your question. But in the meantime, here's another question, and you talked about this, Stan, to a degree. I don't think I quite understand the difference between transition and transgender.
Okay, transgender is actually the person's identity, that that a person knows that, hey, my body does not match who I am deep inside. That I'm basically, I feel like I'm a woman deep inside, but I have a man's body, or vice versa. So transgender is basically the adjective, a transgender man, a transgender woman, a transgender child. Transition is the actual process that a person may choose to go through to modify their body to match who they really feel they are deep inside. And that includes, taking the hormones, having electrolysis, having surgeries, but it's, the process itself. And the transition process can be anywhere from like 1.5 years or so to, for some people, it's almost like a lifetime journey because they're doing it one little step at a time. So transition refers to that process of, modifying your physical characteristics.
Yes, thank you. I think when it comes to this topic, there are some people who just don't know what to do with it. We are in a, and this does not exclude all the other different religions, but a Christian nation, and I think there are people that I've heard and have had conversations with that struggle with the whole concept, the whole community, LGBT. In the workplace, there's no place for that.
Right.
So how do you, just for instance, if you're in a workplace, especially you being in the Bible Belt of North Carolina, how do you have top management to lead the charge, excuse me, that all differences are welcome here? How do you do something?
Well, first of all, most senior leaders and successful executives truly understand the business case that I shared behind diversity. They realize that they're not going to succeed as a company if they don't understand that everyone has to be welcome into the workplace, that everyone has to be performing their best, and you have to reach out to the largest possible customer set. Maybe a little teeny tiny business that only needs like 8 customers might not care, but most companies understand that. So most senior leaders, especially of Fortune 1000, truly understand that. And they do take the leadership to say diversity is important. Then usually the HR team are those that execute, and they provide standards that, you might believe one way, but when you're here in the workplace, you have to treat everyone with equal respect. And that's a requirement of the job. You might believe that LGBT people are sinful, or that God's wrath is going to be upon them, but no matter what you believe, your actions have to be respectful. And that's a condition of employment. And companies are very, very good about doing that.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is there a question? I think we have a question.
So lesson number 6, you talked about being a good representative of the LGBT community. Does this mean making straight/cis people feel safe? And even if you're out as LGBT, continuing to stay inside the lines of monogamy and marriage? What if you are not monogamous, I'm so bad at saying that, and not Christian religious? Can you still be a good leader and representative of the LGBTQ?
Well, that's an interesting loaded question, because there are gobs and gobs of straight people that are swingers and non-monogamous.
Absolutely.
Hey, our president. Okay, anyway. Okay. Anyway, you made a very, very important point, and that's important that, as any community, as a representative of my community, I have to be gracious toward everybody. I have to understand that there might be people who aren't as far along as I am in my journey, where I have to be patient and, and try to explain things to them. People might use the wrong word or might say something unkind to me, and I shouldn't lash out. I need to try to use any kind of, meanness as a learning lesson, and, and not like fight fire with fire. I think that's a very, very good part of, providing a safe space, for allies who might not understand, my community fully.
Absolutely.
And also to, one of the neat things that happened is for me to celebrate, couples, straight couples, and be just as supportive of them as I expect, them to be of me. And I was on a Sierra Club hike, my partner and I, a 2-week long trip in Italy with about 10, heterosexual married couples. And, we built bridges with them, and one of them was selling their 25th anniversary and asked me to do the toast. And I felt, honored that, I could build the bridges with these heterosexual couples that they wanted me to, help celebrate their 25th anniversary.
Absolutely, absolutely. So while we wait for another question, and thank you for that answer, you briefly touched on suicide. Could you talk a little bit about that? And do you find that there are abnormally high numbers in this community when it comes to suicide? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of these, like HRC, these groups that I mentioned, they have a lot of data and studies. And, for the gay community, it's about 3 times the rate of non-gay. And for transgender, suicide attempt is about 9 or 10 times the average population. And again, that's because of the stigma and the hate, and also being rejected by their churches that are very important to them, being rejected by their families. Another staggering statistic is, even though LGBT people only make up 6 or 7% of our population, 20% of homeless teens identify as LGBT. Being thrown on the street by their families and then having to figure out how to live on their own. Many of them, unfortunately, going into prostitution. So, there are, and there's also statistics around the medical that like 47% of transgender people said they've hesitated to go to their doctor being afraid that their doctor would not understand what they're going through. So there are, a lot of statistics where there's, oppression and issues that are unproportionately impacting the LGBT community.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow, those are staggering numbers, Stan. What about the internalized homophobia?
Yeah. And that's, internalized homophobia is very similar to the concept of internalized oppression. And usually if I'm doing a diversity session, I will talk about both of those together. That basically often an oppressed community will end up starting to take on the characteristics that are apportioned to them, by the general public.
Yeah.
So for example, a person, an African American growing up in a very economically disadvantaged neighborhood where there's lots of drug dealing and shootings could say, it's so dangerous here, I'm going to die young anyway, so I might as well engage in dangerous behavior. Internalized homophobia basically says, everyone's telling me a sinner, that I'm not fully human, and so therefore I'm going to throw caution to the wind and engage in dangerous behavior, whether that means, taking recreational drugs or engaging in unsafe sex. And actually the issues of drug addiction and, sexually transmitted diseases are higher among the gay community. And part of that is that internalized homophobia.
Wow. I had two experiences I want to share. One, I went on it was a tour. I went out to LA, and I remember the guide said, as we were traveling through one community, and it was immaculate, it was just fabulous, and he said, well, we're in the gay community because it's the best looking community around. And so I'm asking you about this because the next thing that supports this question I'm about to ask, I think, is that this was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, Detroit, Michigan started advertising. They put out this blanket national recruitment for the gay and lesbians to come to Detroit, Michigan, because they knew that their property value would go up. I'm not making this up.
No, but see, I'm laughing because there's truth in that, and there's also fallacy. And the truth is, often LGBT people will overcompensate, and say, I want to make sure that I'm welcome in this community. I'm going to be on my best behavior, have the nicest house. And that's true of a lot of LGBT people, but also it is a generalization and stereotype. The only reason we have a gorgeous home in our neighborhood is because of my partner. If it was up to me, it would just go to hell. And oh yeah, gay men are supposed to know how to dress. Whenever I go on a trip where I'm going to be gone more than one day, I have to have my partner help pick out my clothes because I have no clue what goes with what and have no fashion sense. So there's a lot of truth in what you say, but there's some of us who are kind of the outliers.
Well, that's the perception. That is the perception. I did not know, and I'm being honest, I did not know about the high suicide rate until I started reading some of the things that that I've been reading, preparing for this session. Here's something. The social isolation and anxiety. I read that this was pretty high in this community.
Yeah.
And you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it is, but it's getting better very quickly. There are pockets of higher isolation. It's more of an issue in rural communities where often it's not as acceptable to come out and you don't have a big city center with an LGBT center. It is also more prevalent in the senior community because often, a smaller number of LGBT people have had children and they don't have, a younger support system. and they feel isolated. And a lot of times senior communities don't know what to do with LGBT people. If they're in a school or a school district that doesn't do good training and doesn't have a gay-straight alliance, there are going to be pockets of isolation in some of our schools. So it's a hit and miss thing. You know, luckily there's a lot of places where schools have gay-straight alliances. There's a lot of churches now that support LGBT people. Most large cities have really robust LGBT support groups and LGBT centers. So it's getting a lot better.
Yes, that's good. That is so good. I gotta tell you, Stan, this has been so phenomenal. I just want to, before it, are there any more questions? No? Okay. I just want to thank you profusely because this has been totally eye-opening to me. If you, one of you have any questions or it was
Very, very good. Yeah.
I'm so glad we recorded. I really am, because I believe that there's a lot of points and information that people can take away. I do have, if you would, one closing comment to someone on the call who may be struggling with either coming out or how to make sure that this community is respected in the workplace. On those two issues, you want to make any final comments on those two things? What do I do if I want to come out and I don't know where to start? Or how do I manage the respect in the organization with staff around LGBT?
Yeah, the first one, you know, that's because everybody has their own journey and people come out at different times. And the best thing is just to find, you know, one person that you can talk to, that, you know, you can reach out to an LGBT organization in the closest town, or think, you know, do I know a gay and lesbian person that, you know, might have gone to my high school with me, or that I remember, you know, coming out and just sharing. There's been several times where I've had friends call me and say, I have something very important to share and let's go out for lunch. And it's to come out for their first time and find, you know, a sympathetic ear and a mentor. I'd also say find, you know, someone who's been in the community and who has a positive attitude to kind of show you the ropes and to help you along with your journey of coming out. In the workplace, again, what you might want to do is look at, you know, for your HR team, you know, who in your HR team is kind of the diversity person and has the expertise. Often it's in the HR department where they draft non-discrimination statements for an organization, where they provide diversity training. And if you feel, hey, you know, I see LGBT unkindness going on, you know, among my peers, you know, maybe go to HR and say, maybe we need to have some training, you know, bring someone in and, you know, do some training and get us interacting with each other and kind of addressing these issues that might be on the workplace. And also you can take some of these, you know, like these slides, especially the business case one, you know, and talk to a leader and say, you know, with the increasing number of out LGBT people, and now that the community and the world is becoming a much more mainstream with LGBT, you know, for our organization to really provide the best support for everyone that's out there, we really do need to make some steps. And, you know, hopefully you'll find someone in the organization who's willing to say, okay, you know, I'm going to take this on.
Absolutely.
And I'd be glad to always, and anybody that wants to invite me up there, you know, I love doing this training and workshops, and a longer session in person. I do some interactive exercises, and we can explore things like stereotyping and trying to understand the LGBT community. So I really enjoy, you know, doing things like this.
It's obvious because you're very, very good.
Yes,
thank you so very much, Stan. I really appreciate this. And so for now, we're going to sign off and say thank you to those of you who decided to share your day with us. Stan's wonderful message We will make sure if you want to have his presentation, please email Stan and he will get it out to you. It's a great way of connecting the two. And again, thank you. And for those of you still on, please watch for our next Learning Cafe that will be coming up in June. But in the meantime, have a great day and do remember to be respectful. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Stan. You're just fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, can I stay on with you for a second?
Absolutely.
Yeah, everybody else can drop off and say goodbye.